you from Vilnius in Lithuania. My name's Lewis. I'm the main moderator over our 2 days here, and I hope that you're enjoying yourself. I hope that you're getting some value out of our discussions and keynotes, and let's see what's coming up next. Our next panel is talking about data privacy versus regulatory requirements. So here's the deal. We need to do anti-money laundering. We need to do know your customer processes. However, this is really gathering a lot of information, and some may say this is too much. Some may say this really gets too deep into the client's privacy. Now, the difficulty is that a lot of these regulations and guidelines are not very clear, and also when it comes to interesting industries like fintech, where we have companies mashing together large data sets, coming up with interesting connections in the data and finding out new bits of information. Is this going to be a problem for data privacy or for the regulators? But here's the kicker. When these connections are made, customers of fintech tend to really like them. So talking about it today, our moderator for this panel is Martinas Belunas. How you doing, Martina?
Oh, I'm keenly looking forward to my session. I have really 4 distinguished speakers who really are experts of their fields, and I hope that we'll definitely get some good recipes for fintechs and understanding of these complexities between privacy, anti-money laundering, know your customer requirements. It's tough, but it's doable.
Okay, tough but doable. I like it. All right, let's begin.
Warm welcome for audience and for all participants of today's session, data privacy versus other regulations like anti-money laundering and know your customer questions. And I'm really thrilled to have to moderate this session today and to introduce my participants, starting from Marios M. Skandalis, Head of Compliance Unit of Bank of Cyprus, Faisal Islam, Head of Anti-Money Laundering and Financial Crimes Unit in Sentinels, Domantas Chulde, a company which takes care about innovative know your customers processes, and of course Tavi Tamkiv, head founder and CEO of Salve.com, the only participant live. Other participants today we have in the remote version. So, dear colleagues, fintech is a very complicated world. It's moving at a very fast pace. At the same time, it's pushed by very different regulations like AML, like Know Your Customer, and recently we got another addition like GDPR. Currently, I've looked into GDPR fines tracker across Europe. Currently, we see that financial institutions already got 37 fines, totaling of 14 million euros. This shows that privacy in the European Union and across the world becomes a non-negotiable factor. At the same time, anti-money laundering and know your customer questions are becoming also very, very pressing for the fintechs, for the big banks, because anti-money laundering infringements can simply suspend your fintech or bank license. So it would be really interesting to understand different perspectives. I do promise for our audience that we'll embrace all the possible perspectives and questions from the tools providers, from the financial sector, and of course also maybe some short insights what regulators think about this area. So, Marios, in your perspective, does the GDPR and all the privacy questions meet their targets at the banks? How do you see the GDPR and AML alignment in the Bank of Cyprus as a big financial institution? Because GDPR it's only 3 years old, while AML requirements are much older. how do you align
Yeah.
them in your everyday job, and how your customers react to that?
First of all, I would like to say hello to all of your audience and to you, and to thank you for inviting me to this very, very interesting discussion and one of the most hot topics, at least for the compliance community. What I would like to note is that indeed GDPR and the overall aspect of data privacy is quite new. It has only been introduced back in 2018, and hence the increased trends, like you very rightly noted at the beginning, Martinez, that we have been seeing over the last few years huge fines for the first time for data privacy violation. And this is obviously because now we have a robust regulatory framework on the area, GDPR, and an area which is quite new to someone that has not been so sensitive with aspects of data privacy violations. Therefore, I believe that this trend of noting certain increased fines will continue to exist even in the next 2 to 3 years, until the whole of this regulation matures, similarly in the way that the AML directive has matured in many countries, especially in Europe. Yes, obviously, GDPR is one of the regulations that contradict with certain other regulations, and I will be more precise with the AML directive, as well with the various DAX 6, the upcoming DAX 7, where we see certain contradictions of the principles that GDPR adheres to, and the principles that the other directives also adhere to. Therefore, we're not saying that GDPR's principle prevail over AML directives principles or DAX 6 principles. However, what needs to be done is that we need to clearly define what are the principles of GDPR vis-a-vis other regulations. And also, once we clearly define this, then we need to be very, very specific as to how we apply all other directives, which, as I said before, they are directives with very specific principles that need to be addressed. And I will be a bit more descriptive on it. Once we basically clearly draft the underlying procedural framework that supports these directives, we need to give very, very specific guidelines to all obliged entities and to the business world as to how this should apply. For example, do we apply across the board the same intensity of due diligence when we onboard a client? Wrong, because we shouldn't be applying the same intensity or enhanced due diligence on low or moderate risk customers compared to high risk customers. This is an area where a contradiction with GDPR applies. But if we say that we have a very light due diligence process for moderate customers and a bit more enhanced for high risk ones, this is fully in line with GDPR because it's very, very prescribed. And the other area of key kind of contradiction and friction is the area of for how long do we maintain records of personal data. Obviously, everybody understands that there are certain cases where such data cannot reasonably be destroyed. We cannot be destroying data for cases, for example, where there is a pending court case or there is a pending investigation for fraud. Therefore, in all such cases, there need to be a clear drafted procedural framework of how do we apply these escalated, let's say, measures for each case. And we need to clearly identify and support three areas. Either we have a legal obligation to hold such personal data, or by holding such data, if it's not a legal obligation, it is of the public interest, or if not on the public interest, it is of a legitimate interest of the corporation to hold such data and basically prove this in case the authorities require. Therefore, in concluding, there is no good or not good legal framework. All regulatory frameworks aim in their own area of work to ensure the integrity of operations, to ensure that we conform to the right compliance framework in the business world that we operate. Therefore, we just need to be very, very specific and transparent in drafting these regulations.
Thanks, Marius. And I take very interesting point from your talk that it's not only a question of legal hold, it's not only a question of legitimate interest, but when we speak about the whole financial ecosystem, that may be even a question of public interest. So thank you very much. And Faisal, I know that your company is doing really advanced research into the technical fields of AML. And do you see any possibility for synergies between anti-money laundering and combating the financial crimes, and at the same time privacy assurance for your customers or your customers' customers?
Yeah, thanks a lot for that question. I'll start with what my colleague earlier just said, that there isn't any good regulatory privacy framework, and we're going to meet on common grounds here, and said there is no good regulatory AML framework either. All of these AML frameworks are the best we have so far and the best we can do with. That being said, it is. Let me start with the fact that AML officers traditionally, and even to this day, have a hard time including privacy into the work that they do for a variety of reasons. The very first reason is the adversary of an AML officer is an illicit person or persons that is using data that they sought without authorization or are being deceptive in order to be able to layer transactions and fulfill the end money laundering cycle. So AML officers, as their adversary, need as much data as possible to be able to counter that itself. So that's the first difficulty they have. The second is AML officers traditionally have never had privacy training. It is not included at all in any of their curriculums, both academically or institutionally or even operationally. Third, the BSA AML officer, PCMLT AML officer, or the AML-D6 AML officer, generally in his AML policy or package, does not include the privacy part. In fact, most fintechs, and since we are at FinTech In, have their privacy policy limited to the terms of service on their website or a single privacy document inside of their privacy package. So again, the AML officer is not included, or probably has not asked to be included inside of any discussions with regards to privacy. And finally, with regards to incentives, because like it or not, that's how a lot of it works. The headline number on the AML sector for AML officers is $2 trillion of 1% interested. It's the most common number that's being used all the time. That is the scare. It is $2 trillion worth of laundered funds, 1% that has been intercepted. Your work now is to increase that percentage. And finally, there is personal liability from an AML officer side if he does not conduct properly his work. There is personal liability that is attached to every single regulatory framework of AML, irrespective of jurisdiction. Whereas in the GDPR framework, while there is a line that has to do with personal imprisonment there is no pronouncement on personal liability from the GDPR standpoint. So all these things together make it extremely difficult for AML practitioners to consider privacy as something that they would want to be able to engage in their daily activity. At Sentinels, our work is really providing the best AML technology that we can for fintechs in this space, and really supporting the end user. And the end user here is AML compliance officers. and they do recognize the need for searching and extracting as much data as possible. They do have an internal and in-house privacy officer that monitors this. So one of the technologies that has been discussed for a while, and certainly we have other folks on this panel that are equally versed in this, probably more than I am, is the use of homomorphic encryption to be able to exchange data within institutions that are sharing financial information. So we can talk a little bit more about that. But I will end by saying one thing, which is my colleague earlier mentioned having a tiered type of selection between low risk customers and high risk customers, and have the data management issued according to the rating of the customer that's there. I'll return back with saying that nowadays, KYC and AML risk management is no longer done by traditional nationally recommended KYC principles. Rather, it is personal and privacy related data that qualifies whether a customer is low risk or high risk. It is no longer what country they're from or what product they're using, but really a lot of the other data that has nothing to do with the KYC data. AML officers traditionally have used and still use adverse media, which is essentially just it's glorified web scraping, to be able to find out news and events about that individual or company, and then use that information to qualify as to whether this customer should be considered low risk or high risk. If you extend that further into essentially capturing the social graph or the social network, and by that extension, the behavior and the activities of that individual on the social network, if you extend that also with data that you get from scraping bank data when someone logs into their bank account, you're using that information, and AML officers do use that information into qualifying a customer as to whether they are low risk or high risk. And on ongoing monitoring, they still use that data to either keep them at that same rating, increase it if needed, or lower it if needed. So unfortunately, AML officers are in this position where A, they're not trained, they haven't been incentivized to care about it. Their work is only significantly better if they have access to more data. And the number one thing, which is keeping the ratings of high or low, depending on customers, depends on how much data and more access to data that they have. And all this because the adversary that they're fighting couldn't care less about privacy themselves, which is why the ML officers have to sort of walk this line of, I have to do what I have to do within the bounds of what is allowed, because I actually have personal liability if I don't fulfill an AML obligation, but I don't have a personal liability if I cross a privacy line. So that's my take on it.
Thanks, Faisal, and you really well uncovered this, even I would call it personal conflict for all AML officers. Should I take care about privacy, or should I take care about my AML duties? And this conflict definitely exists. Domante, moving further and deeper into the privacy in the fintech and banking space. In GDPR, there is such category of data which is called special categories data, which means biometric information like fingerprints, iris, face photos and 3D images and so on. And by GDPR and most of other privacy legislation, such information should be protected even with broader means, with deeper technological security than usual personal data. I know that at your company you're doing a lot of work with biometry. How do you deal with biometry? How are you ensuring biometry security and at the same time keeping your know your customer obligations for fintechs and banks which you work with?
Thank you, Martinos, for a great question, and as well thank you, the colleagues, for covering interesting questions as well. Yeah, so at our company we use biometric recognition a lot, I can say. By starting that, as we're using identity verification, and with identity verification, biometric recognition is one of the main things, because we have to take a pictures of the ID document, we have to take a picture of the face, and we have to extract the biometrics and compare with each other, and to recognize if a person is the same as in the ID and is the same as in the selfie picture. Yes. Yeah. How it looks like from the side that we actually customers do not usually want to process biometric data. Yes. We do not want to store this data, because if we as superprocessor process this data and store it within our databases, and data controller, the customer, um, it would be storing the special category data, as you said, the biometric data. Yes. And yeah, in this way, the customer has to complete the DPA to have allowance to store this data. Yes. But what we see in practice, that most of our customers do not like to do that. I can cover more topics about that. There is a lot of new technologies which we can use in the fight with fraudsters, with the money launderers, and but we need to save biometric data. Yes. But unless we can do that, the customers refuse to save the biometric data. So we can use only simple recognition systems, and how it works in real life. So we just extract biometrics from the face. We extract the biometrics as well from ID cards. Yeah. And we compare biometrics, and we do not save this data for later use. Yes. um, I can say there is very good technologies around that, if we can reuse biometric data. For example, facial authentication systems. Yes. um, Facial authentication systems is working in the way, once we do the identity verification, we save the biometric data in the databases, and afterwards, for example, customer lose access to their banking system, we need to recover account. Yeah. In old ways, we use SMS verification, we call to bank, but actually with functionalities like facial authentication, you can do that in a really simple and easy way, and actually in safe way. So customer is once they would like to recover their access to the account, we have to take the selfie, and we extract the biometrics. We check the biometrics with data which we have in our database, and we compare if it is the same person. Yes. And so why it's good? It's good because such functionality, there is no possibilities how to spoof such functionality, how to fool these systems. And it is good because you always have your face with you. and and for example, like email verification, SMS verification, this all the methods is not safe anymore because of viruses or because of trojans and botnets. So we can take over your phone, access to your phone, access to your email, to take all information about you, and to use it for account recovery process. So yeah, what I see here, that actually regulations like GDPR um, is limiting us, because the customers, as I mentioned it, do not want to process to save biometric data. They do not want to do the DPA, because once we come to them, we always get the answer. For example, we come to them, hey, look, we have a new functionality. You can implement in your processes, in your system, so you will be defended from fraudsters and extra. But most of the customers see that we have to store biometric data, so they refuse to do that. They do not want to do the DPA. And it's really complicated for me to understand, actually, because uh, because biometric special category data is biometric data. Yes, but the face photo is not biometric data, and here is some missed part, I can say, because because if we have a face photo, we can attach neural networks and extract the biometric data from the photo. And so, all right, so if there is some risks that we can lose this data with a data breach or in another ways, so why we can store face photos and why we cannot store the biometrics, because just to get the biometrics from the face photo, it's very simple.
Well, I can
So yeah, so answering
I can
Martinez, your
understand
question.
GDPR point that biometry data is highly sensitive, and let's say European Data Protection Authority is simply afraid that in future the identity may be replicated using biometry data, but some hashes they don't allow to fully replicate face, fingerprint, or any other kind of data. But Domantas, I fully see your future picture, that future is completely passwordless, because it will be much more secure. Your password is your face, your fingerprint, and that definitely should be somehow incorporated into the European and worldwide privacy. David, I just wanted to ask you about international data transfers, because currently when we look into the privacy field, there is such so-called concept of data residency. Each country now wants to keep the data inside. European Union typically says that please keep your data in the European Union. There was a big failure, a so-called privacy shield agreement between European Union and US. Other countries, even if we take our eastern neighbors, Russia, China, same story. All the countries want to keep their personal data of their citizens inside. I know that SALF is dealing also with international data transfers. How do you approach that topic? How to ensure this international data transfers? Because when we look to the banking, to the fintechs, it's a truly global industry. We cannot contain the business in one country and ensure one country data residency. So how SALF deals with international data flows?
Thank you for that. It's like actually many of the topics that you discussed earlier also triggered me that okay, I know the stuff. Like I've been facing the same challenges, and like one of the okay, there's a question of GDPR, but there is also a question of data security that you're asking. But like of course, like data residency has to be defined, and like we need to follow that. But it's like coming from the AML side of the world and crime fighting side of the world, and thinking how to treat GDPR and possible limitations from the GDPR. I have learned that it's like proportionality is some keyword that we need to follow. Like, is it like about doing due diligence on our customers using adverse media as discussed, or like looking into Facebook, shall I use my own Facebook account or an anonymous Facebook account when I'm Googling, or checking my customer's background, can I do that or not? Again, like if it's a suspicious customer, then like internal policies should justify like why and if I can check the LinkedIn profile of your person or your company. The point is that the data sharing can be done if it's secure, and if you have some like a reasonable reason or proportional reason that you're trying to fight crime, or maybe there are some other reasons as well. So, and again, like when we're talking about data sharing across the borders, now we're operating here in Europe, which is pretty much following the same legislative basis. It's actually not a challenge from legal side of things, but it's the challenge is like how to convince people that you can exchange data if you have a reasonable cause for that, and like also the amount of data can be like has to be proportional to the need. Like discussion about biometric data, like your color of your eye, is it blue or like brown? It's also very, very sensitive, very personal. But if a customer comes to my office and shows the passport which has a green, like blue eyes, and then I look at your face and I see that they're brown eyes, I see the conflict, and I use this private data against you to say that no, it's not, it's a fake ID that you're using, or if your passport says that you're a woman but actually you're a man, again, it's very private, very sensitive. But so this kind of, but it wouldn't be okay to record it for all the customers, like without selecting, without being high risk, or without saying that this is like there is some crime prevention, or there is some risk mitigation that I'm doing here. So the point is that like also today, like providers, if banks and fintechs are buying PEP lists and sanction lists and adverse media lists. So this has been scraped across the globe from different places. Like if like Japanese newspaper writes about something about me, then at some stage it crosses Japanese border, it gets into US maybe, then it gets into Europe, and my bank is screening me against this information. So like it's not the problem actually. Like the problem is in people's head, not in the legal or technical side of things. In our case, like we're resolving it really simply. We're like encrypting everything that we're getting, so we're like just data processor, like pipe between the fintechs and institutions, and we're saying to them that guys, it's your duty to make sure that you have reason to exchange this data. Here are possible reasons. It's your job to figure out what kind of data points you want to share. Okay, these are the possible examples, and your data controller, not us. And the people finally do understand that. But the key is that people like us here, who are technology providers, we need to educate the financial sector about how to interpret the GDPR, what's allowed, what's not allowed, how to treat that. Because I've seen that people are just emotionally afraid, or they're not used to using the principles of GDPR.
You touched a very interesting point that data flows, it's not only about your data. For example, if I decide to open an account in Belarus, my data, of course, should be submitted to the Belarus authorities, but also data flow back. For example, as you mentioned, the scraping of data from all the media, all the sources, and collecting it, which in GDPR language is called profiling. And profiling is very, very tricky operation, which generally can bear some legal consequences to the fintechs and so-called data controllers. Marius, returning back to you, there is one very interesting point when I'm looking to the financial business across the world. There is a kind of acronym, UBO, Ultimate Beneficial Owners. And to be honest, this acronym scares me a little bit, because now the trend is very clear that authorities, regulators are requiring deeper insight into the customer's information, collect information about their businesses. Also, another dimension that fintechs and banks trying to reach their customers, they're starting to collect more data. So it's data not only about finance, but for example, some data for marketing, for customers' behaviors, preferences, and so on. So how do you see these trends going in the future, and how your bank plans to deal from the compliance perspective to keep good insights on the customers, but also to satisfy the regulators here?
You've touched two aspects now, Martinez. The first one relates to the amount of data collected, which becomes more and more and more. And the second aspect you touched is in relation to the ultimate beneficial owners, the UBOs. As far as the first aspect is concerned, the aspect of data collected, the principle of proportionality should be honored in all respects. You cannot be collecting the same amount of data, the same complexity of information, requesting the same complexity of information from a high-risk customer, and at the same time requesting the same information from a moderate or a low-risk customer. There should be clear lines between the amount, the volume of data, especially personal data, that you are collecting, either for a review or for the onboarding process of a client. Coming on the area of ultimate beneficial owners, I do not, and it should not be seen as a threat or as a risk to data privacy collecting information of UBOs. UBOs is a key and an essential area to promote transparency and integrity of operations. Therefore, there shouldn't be any form of fear or contradiction in providing the identity of the owner, the real identity of the owner, the real owner of any legal entity. However, if in addition to identifying in a transparent manner who is the real UBO, you start asking additional questions as to what is the net worth of this individual, and entering into additional personal data, then yes, this should be avoided. And this is an area where the personal, let's say, aspects that are not really needed to assess this transparency that I've just talked are asked. Therefore, yes, UBO is an essential piece of information that is needed for financial institution, and it will become even more transparent in the future. Let us not forget, Martinas, the evolution of the UBO registries that are currently requested in all countries. It started by being registered with access only by those institutions, by specific institutions and authorities that had a legitimate interest. For example, only police or tax authorities could have access initially to such a registry, provided that they had a court decision allowing them to do so. Currently, everything moves in having public access to such registries. If you are asking me, is that right? I would say probably not, because members of the public would probably be accessing such registries not for obtaining data that would help them legitimately assess any kind of relationship, but on the contrary, it's mostly done for gossips and for cannibalization of that data of an individual. Therefore, yes, UBO's registries are needed. UBO registries should form part of any basic due diligence, even for a low-risk customer or for a high-risk customer, but both the level of access should not be in general public, and also the level of information that is provided for that individual should be restricted to the absolute minimum needed for any form of relationship, either a banking relationship or a fiduciary service provision relationship.
Talib?
Yeah, just wanted to comment on this. UBO question. Like, it's interesting where the Europe is going now, because like on one hand this AML package which is coming out to dictate like new like the sixth directive and also direct laws is trying to like harmonize the UBO requirements across the Europe to come up with a more precise definition who's UBO or not. So if I'm thinking as a criminal, then it's super good if this kind of clarity is created, because I know that what are the checks that banks and others need to do, and what I need to do to bypass these checks. So it's like a super good manual for the criminal contingent. But at the same time, there's a lot of instability in the approaches today in Europe. When I was helping one venture capital firm from Germany to open bank account in Estonia, and the Estonian bank asked them to share all the UBOs or all the limited partners of this venture capitalist fund. Then it was like, for a German company, it was like incredible how Estonian bank can ask about their UBOs, because like no one else has asked about this information from them so far. Although Germany is also like super compliant, super strict. It was first experience. So like it showed to me how differently different parts of Europe even interpret these laws. Like, and if you extend to the rest of the world, it's like very, very unstable. A lot of unexpected questions coming up even from this like three-letter term acronym UBO that's very, very different to resolve.
So at least UBO should have clarity and I would say very clear connection to privacy and to other AML procedures, because the changes are coming, and in the banking sector, as we discussed, it should be very streamlined and clear. Touching another point, because whatever article of GDPR I touch, there are problems. It doesn't click well with AML, with Know Your Customer. Faisal, I know you are using a lot of artificial intelligence in your approach to AML and KYC business. And if we look to the GDPR, artificial intelligence is problematic, because according to GDPR, the decisions can be questioned if they are done by, roughly saying, by machine. So how to deal with that area? Because a lot of decisions now is done specifically by artificial intelligence without human involvement. How to deal with that conflict between privacy and AML requirements?
Sounds good. Martinez, before I get into that answer, can you oblige me and allow me to comment on the comments from the colleagues
Absolutely,
just
absolutely.
previous to me? Okay, so the first comment I wanted to make about the concept of being very sensitive on traversing biometric media and how it's stored, how it's picked up, when it's picked up, and so on. I think that's a good solution, but it's not the problem that's facing right now. Right now, the problem that's facing is there is already privacy sensitive data that exists inside of AML files that have been largely ignored for the longest amount of time. And I think only with the advent of internet right now, we're suddenly trying to put steps for other types of data extraction methods that we sort of ignored in the past. So let me take an example of the driver's license, which is the most commonly used piece of identification in vastly all of the countries where AML regs are the norm. On that driver's license is the mentioning of the color of your eye, and in most places also your height. And in some places there's other data on it. Yet that the picture of that driver's license is inside of every single AML file of every single institution that has it nowadays. So transversing the eye color through biometric means with new technology doesn't actually increase any more the privacy leak that already exists from the AML practice of collecting the driver's license that has data which is not relevant to the AML itself. So my ask here is before we go ahead and put solutions to problems that it's not really what we want to solve is go back in our existing AML files, see what kind of information we've already taken that did not need it, strip them, mask them, put fixes there, and then put new information in place. Same thing with spending data. The most common use of proof of address data for most institutions everywhere around the world is a bank statement. On the bank statement, you have the spending data, but yet I guarantee you most financial institutions have not backdated their bank statements, gone back and then blacked out all the spending data that's on the bank statement. So right now, having controls in place for new types of protection of privacy is not the solution to the problem that already exists. Is that data is already inside of the AML files that exist for a very long time. On the second comment about UBO registers, allow me to be cynical if that hasn't already been showed here. My wife is the one that pays the price for my cynicism. But the concept of the UBO register, again, is the solution to not the problem that we're having. The problem we're having with transparency is that the corporate enablers and those that set up the associations and set up the front men and register the companies and the individuals behind them are the ones that have that information and are not sharing it. Therefore, on a UBO register, if it was extremely transparent, you would find individuals that are the right individuals and it would pass the test. Because the accountants, lawyers, and corporate enablers that are creating these entities and setting the individuals as the UBOs are handpicking and choosing individuals to be able to be the front person of that company itself. Why? They don't have a disincentive yet. In a lot of countries around the world, these individuals, so accountants, lawyers, and corporate setup organizers, don't have an incentive to be able to report if there is suspicious activity on the formation of the company or the individuals that are representing that company. So having a UBO register is a good idea, but it wouldn't solve the issue of who the real UBO is, because the people that are setting up the UBO don't have a disincentive for it. So that's my comment on the UBO register. And then finally, with regards to AI and how it relates to privacy and GDPR, it's actually a very big problem when it comes to creating models, because for the most part, and at least up until now, AI models have been traditionally black box. It has been unexplainable. And so at Sentinels, because of our previous organization, we used to be slimmer, we adopted a method of essentially having transparency on the type of model that we create. It was a 6-step process. And the end result of that process was we realized that the customer for which you provide the model has to be informed in every step of the way what data has been extracted, what has been shown to them, what are the results coming as a result, and then share with them the results that will be interesting for them, as well as the results that are not interesting for them. That way, they have an idea or a very large sense of how that model is working. And therefore, they'll have an easier time explaining it also to a regulator as to the explainability of the model itself. That's what a lot of regulators are asking for, is explainability in the AI. With regards to sharing, the challenge there is that there isn't yet a good process for what is called federated learning. So you have a model that you're deploying at one client location. And that, so let's say that client is also part of a network that has the same model deployed in another company. You want to have some type of a federated learning system where that data off the model can be shared with others, provided that both of them had models that were explainable to begin with. That's a very difficult problem that we're only one of hundreds that are still working on. But when we get to that stage, I think we'd have probably better information to relay back on that. That's sort of my comment on that.
Okay, thank you, Faisal. And yeah, I truly agree that federated approaches will be effective in future, and we need to come somehow to this federated view on the different financial institutions sharing their data into some pool. So continuing on other problems, and really when I look to the GDPR, the whole 100 pages of this very important regulation, whatever piece I pick, there is a problem and there is incompliance. So really hard to find something which kind of is completely fully aligned. I know that there are movements in the level of European Data Protection Board, discussion with financial supervisory authorities, European Central Bank, how to align AML and GDPR and other privacy requirements, but it's still on very early stages. Coming e-privacy directive will add additional load on fintechs, banks, and other businesses for the privacy regulations. So, Tave, being an expert, knowing your customers and also the means which you are giving to them how to deal with a business, what area is more important to the customers, AML or privacy, and how to approach that, how to keep with them both together, not satisfying only AML requirements and forgetting the privacy?
Just to comment your question, when I'm reading GDPR, I don't see a problems, I see opportunities over there, because that's why I also am an entrepreneur myself. But yeah, really, it helps to structure the thinking how I want. Me as a private person, how I want organizations to treat my data, but also it gives a structure how to do other things like prevent crime and other. When you're asking what's more important for my clients, is it AML or privacy, then as my clients are fintechs and banks, AML and MLROs, AML people and MLROs, then definitely for them it's more important to beat financial crime, and GDPR is just giving them the framework around it. If you're asking about end user, customers of the banks, customers of the fintechs, it is a good question, and it depends on how to ask from them. Just to give example from the other side of the world, in Estonia I'm helping also our government with Corona, fighting with some data, like just think tank, or like how to use data points to track Corona, like how to watch people if they're at home in quarantine or not, and the mobile tracking comes into play quite quickly. Can government watch all the time where people are with their mobiles? Is it allowed or not allowed? And again, like it's super sensitive topic. I don't want my government to watch where I am constantly all the time. So if you would ask from me that am I okay if my government knows where I am right now, then I'm not okay with that. But if you would ask that, if you would set it up in a way that can government get alert if I'm leaving my home, but I should be at home. Like basically, if I'm meant to be in quarantine, but I'm leaving my quarantine place 100 meters away, then they should get alert. Then it's completely different story, right? The idea is that again it has to be proportional. If government wants to monitor every citizen everywhere all the time, then my answer is that privacy is more important. If the question is like in only this 0.1% of cases when I go against the laws or I do something suspicious, can then my FIU or government get notification about that? Then yes, I'm happy to that they will know this. And it's like we have also done some public opinion researches or questionnaires, and then this is pretty same. Like if we ask it in wrong way, and if you propose it as big brother is watching you, then of course everyone is against that. But if we're positioning in the way that why exactly we want to do and what's the minimal stuff that we want to do, then it's fine. And the same applies in the AML world as well. That do you want do you want your government or like bank to identify like possible drug traders from the streets, or like do you want to like prevent some like Belarus people coming to Lithuania? Like yes, you want to prevent that, and for that we need to exchange data between Lithuania and Belarus banks or like fintechs. That's a completely different story, and that's again it's not buzzwording, or it's not about like hiding the thing, but that's actually all the complex models and complex technologies that we're building here as a companies, they are very focused, like they can be narrowed down to specific use cases, specific problem solutions. And that's like one of the worst thing maybe that GDPR did in the beginning. It felt as a very general, very wide thing that everyone has to comply with. It's a crazy thing, but actually if you read, you can see that if I do this specific stuff proportionally in smart way, then it's completely fine. It's education that we need to bring.
I feel that there is one topic which is going around all of us, that all of us we are talking about education and explaining to the businesses and customers that both AML and privacy requirements were not something bad. If it's proportional, it's good. It's good for society, it's good for people, it's good for customers. So I think we need to do a lot of work explaining, educating, and setting the whole framework of trust, which is not so easy in those turbulent times. Coming into the end of our discussion, and I know that we just barely touched the surface of privacy and other regulations in the fintech sector. It's really complicated, but on the other hand, it's really exciting. There is a future, there is a business in that. So I would like to ask each of our participants just to express short opinion, short recipe for financial industry participants, for fintechs, banks. What is the future trend? How to align privacy and other regulations? So, Marios, let's start from you.
Okay, Martinas, just allow me a very small comment before providing these remarks. You've mentioned before in blockchain technology, and basically the fact that this sort of distributed ledger technology keeps a record of the identity of each transacting party. Let us not forget that this same technology is used for cryptocurrencies, which basically their prime purpose is to conceal the identity of any of the transacting parties, which although obviously is a platform which provides a robust integrity of the data moving around, at the same time, it does not necessarily mean that personal data are used in any of the transactions. On the contrary, all cryptocurrencies have the underlying platform being a distributed ledger technology platform. And as we all know, most of the money launderers all around the world, they use cryptocurrencies for performing their integration of money into the economy. Coming to your remarks, as a closing remark, I would like to note that the era that we live in and the evolution of this era, first of all, is an era of transparency. What's the evolution of this era? It's going to be even further transparency. As long as we are ethical in the way that we think, in the way that we operate, yes, we shall be pursuing transparency, but the level of information in providing in order to pursue this transparency should be the absolute minimum for the purpose it serves. Therefore, we cannot say that, no, I will be having a bank account, but no, I'm not going to give my name to be kept on a UBO registry. Why not? If I want to be transparent, if I want to say, yes, I'm the holder for this X amount of money and of these funds, why shouldn't I have it there? However, at the same time, and the authorities and the overall system should protect two things. First of all, that this information is not given to anybody, and that the information kept about me is the absolute minimum to serve the purpose, to serve its purpose. Therefore, we need to really honor these two principles: the principle of transparency and the principle of not abusing the level and the extent of personal data used.
Thank you, Marius. Faisal, any concluding comments from your side?
Well, I'll just add by saying my colleague before mentioned that money laundering is mostly done by cryptocurrency, if I heard that correctly. If that's the case, that is unequivocally not true. I'm not a cryptocurrency user, but the biggest helpers of money launderers for the most part is not cryptocurrency, but traditional banks and large institutions and remitters. They have been the best conduits for money laundering, not cryptocurrency, since whenever money laundering was a thing. With regards to the final comments about what the next step is, I think one of the things that needs to be included in AML training is the concept of privacy. That has been lacking for the most part in the certification, education of AML compliance officers, whether that's academic or private or institutionalized. That training has never included privacy. And the importance about it and the care about it has not been included. I think that absolutely needs to be included and needs to start right away. The second step I would say is that the AML frameworks that are being developed need to also include in there the minimum sufficiency requirement. So when an AML framework sort of suggests or provides guidance to, for example, say, use a driver's license as a method of identifying, should also say, but mask identification that does not require you to establish identity. So, for example, the next new update in some AML framework might say, you can go ahead and take a driver's license, but make sure you have technology or you ask for the eye color or the height on that identification to be masked out. That practice and that incorporation in the AML practice would be a first step for AML officers to take privacy important with an important point of view, and at the same time would align the AML work that needs to be done while maintaining privacy on an ongoing basis.
Thank you, Faisal. Domantai, any KYC insights into the future, recommendations?
Yes, as I mentioned it before, about the biometric data usage. So as the regulations is important. Yes, it covers the privacy things, it covers the human rights, and for example, as GDPR limit us with the biometric technologies development by saying that the biometrics are the special category data. Yes, so I think looking in the future and what we see right now, that if we can use, for example, biometric data and develop technologies to fight against fraudsters, against money launderers, so the regulation should allow us to do that. Because current results, what we see right now, the criminal activity is growing. So even during the COVID period, it's growing a lot. I could say, and when we are limited by the regulation to fight against fraud by limiting, for example, the SIM biometrics, to use the SIM biometrics in technologies, I think we are taking out of from us the guns to fight in this fight. Yeah. I think the good approach would be for the regulators to, once we develop the regulation, take for the consultations as well, also the market players. Let's say if a regulation is connected with AML or KYC or cyber security, so just take the market players for consultation and the market players can see what we see, what the future developments we see, what the things maybe could be not limited for them, and yeah, so this is my short feedback.
Thank you, Domantai. Tavi, any concluding remarks from your side?
Yes, one thing that we didn't discuss today, but I strongly believe that KYC part is strongly over-regulated. Like 80% of the company's efforts and laws are describing how to do the KYC and what you need to do, which ultimately has huge impact on the privacy data processing. And today, the actual behavioral monitoring, the AML, like what is my financial behavior, what are the links and networks around me, that's heavily underestimated and under-prioritized. And what I'm trying to do, and I hope that this industry does with me, is like changing this portion that like if we get better with the actual behavioral detection through AI, through like the new technologies, data sharing that we're doing, then need for this like direct KYC is going down. And you understand that it's not about like who is the person, but actually what this person does. And you need to detect criminals based on these doings, not on the identity itself, which ultimately takes down the pressure from the privacy data processing and puts more effort on the like more complex AML investigations.
Thank you very much. And very huge thanks for our distinguished speakers. I hope that we just opened the Pandora's box on the privacy and other regulations, internal compliance.
You sure you want to use the word Pandora?
Can you close it down, please?
Okay. So thanks very much for the distinguished speakers, and I hope that we can continue this topic. Of course, we didn't discuss cryptocurrencies, but we got a lot of good suggestions. We got suggestions on training. We got suggestions on different levels of customer, so to say, insights. That the higher risk customer should get one level of insights, lower risk customer gets completely different level of insights. We get insights into the KYC area, that market should be consulted, market leaders, participants should be consulted how to do this, because currently there are no clear recipes yet, but it's very clear that all the industries, both privacy and fintech, move into the same direction here. So thanks a lot once.